right, starting now. Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to Interop testing number 34. We have a very packed agenda today, and the idea is that we start with everything non-EUF, and then time box that to 15 minutes at the start, and then we proceed to discuss EUF. Team is gonna help us moderate on the EUF segment. So yeah, let's just get started. So the first item in the agenda that is non-EUF is Spectra testing. Before anyone, any other points, the only point from the testing team that we have today is that there has been a new release. I'm gonna share it in the chat, and it mainly contains the main breaking point in this release is that we have introduced the deposit contract testing. So these are basically impossible test scenarios for mainnet, but it is something that we want to test, so that's what we wanted to include. We're gonna reach out to every client team to see their status and their stance on fix and no fix for this impossible test case. Yeah, and that's that. There's that. We have run all of the other test cases for this in Hive, and it seems like everything is looking well. And the other bullet point from the EF testing is that we are gonna potentially make a new release for this week. It's gonna be packed with more BLS testing, but we have run every single test case on all clients, and everything is looking good. And yeah, that's basically it from the EF testing. I'm passing on to DevOps to see if they're having any points that they want to raise regarding Pectra testing. Let me see who's here. Hey, yes, thank you.
1 or 2 points, I think. So we're working on a mainnet shadow fork right now. We should have the network up in the next hour or two, and we'll share a report about it tomorrow. One of our nightly tests, it failed with an asserter failure on consolidation. So we're just trying to reproduce it. And if it's actually a non-false positive, then we'll bring it up. But besides that, I think Barnabas had one more point he found over the last few days, but that should be it from our side.
My point is mainly focused on minimal spec test, so we can circle back later.
Barnabas, is the same request per payload for main and minimal, or is something else?
Yes.
All right, cool. Powell?
Will the East release contain the static test?
Yes, we're looking forward to that, and we have everything ready for static test. Should be included. Yep. Justin?
So basically had an update over the weekend where we are actually failing fast if you have Pectra enabled at Genesis, but you do not have all the system contract addresses defined in your Genesis. So I think that Barnabas might be aware of this. Perry wanted to bring it to your attention. You're going to want to update to the DevNet 7 Genesis file that I opened a PR for, at least, for the mainnet shadow fork. The details are in that PR. Enjoy.
We're probably not going to actually do Pectra Genesis or Pectra Genesis for the shadow fork. We probably want to see a fork transition. So I think it shouldn't be a problem.
No. Not Pectra at Genesis, just if it has Pectra enabled anywhere.
Oh, anywhere, okay.
Yeah.
If you have a Pectra milestone, you need to have those contracts defined.
Okay, yeah, we will have it.
Godspeed.
On that topic, we merged the Hive PR yesterday, so we should be good there.
Thanks, Mario.
All right. Any other Pectra testing related topics that we want to cover today? Anybody else? Luca just posted station packing bug must have been fixed. And he posted an analysis. Anything else that you want to comment on that?
No, that's it. Just the confirmation that it's been fixed.
Awesome, thanks. Barnabas? Yes?
Yeah, I have one more point to raise. Nimbus made a new release in last weekend. So if anyone has updated their Nimbus node, then they might need to update again. So this was regarding a bug found in Amiga workflow.
And from the comments, Prism is also preparing a 6.0.1 release as well. So please take note of that and update notes. All right. If there's nothing else, we can do a quick follow-up to PeerDAS testing. Does the DevOps team have any updates on PeerDAS specific testing?
I think the only one is that we got rid of DevNet 6. So PeerDAS DevNet 6 has been deprecated. So all the testing that would be done on PeerDAS would now be done on the Sunnyside Labs network. And the main reason is that we found quite a few bugs over the last week, and clients needed some time to fix all of those bugs, and there was no sense in the network until the bug fixes were in. So we're hoping that some point this week we can launch DevNet 7 for PeerDAS.
Sounds good. Anything else for PeerDAS? Any clients are ready for DevNet 7? Or anything that they should know about this new tablet?
I don't think so. I think most of the discussions would happen on the PeerDAS testing call. That'll be tomorrow. And there's already kurtosis configs for whoever wants to try their fixes locally.
Perfect. All right, we can discuss it tomorrow then. If there's is there anything else for PeerDAS that anyone wants to bring up? Otherwise, before jumping into EOF, I think we can just pick up the point that Barnabas, do you want to raise it regarding minimal mainnet consensus specs change?
Yeah, so we talked to Justin last week about possibly changing the minimal spec for the execution request. For example, the max deposit request per payload and max withdrawal request per payload. And we came to the conclusion that it's probably better to use the mainnet defaults instead of trying to have a custom value set for minimal preset, because then the EL side of things would also need to know about the minimal spec. And that's not something that currently any of the ELs support, and probably not something they want to support either. So if this there's a PR about that, let me just link it quick. Oh yeah, Mario already linked it. It would be good if all the CLs could take a look and maybe even squeeze this change into their next small release. Hopefully then we can start testing the minimal up to.
All right. Yep.
One quick
Please take a look.
quick thing. Clients will probably need to wait until the next consensus specs release to make this change. Otherwise, the test will fail, like the reference tests.
Yeah, the question is whether we want to push for this before mainnet or not.
I see no reason to do that.
Yeah, same. I think it's mainly just a minimal test with a certain number of deposits that fail, which I think is fine to wait for a week or two before.
Makes sense. Okay. So CL client teams, please take a look into this PR so we can coordinate what the following steps are. All right. Any other non-EOF topics that we want to touch upon that are critical before jumping into EOF? All right. If there's nothing else, I think we can just start the EOF discussion. Tim, do you want to kick us off in that topic?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mario. And yeah, thanks everyone for showing up. I think this is the first time we get 100 people on the testing call. Yeah, I guess before we jump in, just a couple things. Like, first of all, I know that people feel very strongly about this, and I think it's worth being clear that like whether or not we move forward with EOF, like clearly there's been a lot of work and effort put by client team, by EIP champions, testing teams, and other into this. So like I don't think we should associate decision to do EOF or not based on like or that should imply that we don't kind of value that work. Like it's good that we try things out, and if we learn that they're not a fit or they're not a fit for now, we still did learn something. And yeah, very differing opinions about what we should do here. My sense is I do think people generally want to improve Ethereum, so please keep this in mind as you respond to others throughout this call. I don't think that anyone is acting in like bad faith or malice. People may have different visions of how do you get to a good end state, but yeah, you should try to assume the best. And then before we jump into the specifics, like I know a bunch of people raised concerns about like the process and should we even be opening this can of worms again. I think my view there is that it is important that the process gives you like some credibility and assurance that, you know, when we make a decision, we don't work on it in vain. That said, like we can never be sure about these things. And this is partially why we changed, you know, the EIP status from included to scheduled for inclusion, is that things come up and we have to adapt. And I think until something's on the Ethereum mainnet, we should always be willing to reconsider and get to the best decision. When we ship something, we cannot revert that. And so we should really, really have a high bar to doing it. And this means that, you know, we should be okay descoping when necessary. And having like a very high bar to then change or have last minute additions, because again, that kind of undermines this. This said, I think at a high level, a good way to like proceed here is we can quickly recap the issue that came up last week. Ipsilon has done some analysis over the weekend about the actual like scope and what's been affected. So we can hear from them, and then the client teams have shared their view around EOF, so we can hear from their updated views. But maybe, yeah, for people who weren't on Alcor Devs last Thursday, at a high level, the kind of problem or thing that came up is the concerns that not only does EOF have some have some compilation issues for existing contracts that use code introspection, which people knew, but more that many of the core dependencies that are used in these contracts effectively use inline assembly or features like that make it harder or impossible to import them in post EOF contracts. This is a pretty major change in the developer experience, because it's not just that you can't, you know, rewrite your contract, but you can't use, say, an Open Zeppelin library in your contract if you're compiling under EOF. And that concern kind of triggered this entire debate. So yeah, that's basically the thing that changes. Like, I think this realization that there are many core libraries that would have to be imported into EOF contracts that would be impossible to do so under this current form. These libraries would not break on Ethereum, like they would still work as is. And, you know, people can still use the legacy EVM forever, but it's just that the migration path of most popular or like production applications requires not only the engineers from that application to write some new code, but also their entire dependency tree, possibly. So with that said, yeah, I don't know who's the best person from Ipsilon, but they did write a great document going into more depth there. So if someone can post a link and give a quick overview of the actual issue, that would be helpful.
Okay, I posted a link on the summary.
Wrong link, but you can get started and I'll find the right link.
Oh, yeah, that's the call link. I just copy paste here on my keyboard, kind of a problem. EOF, yeah, EOF source lives impact. Maybe I should share the screen on this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So we looked at the top 4 contracts. Well, top 4, we picked 4 big ones we thought that would, be emblematic of the types of changes that we might need to do. Just do a straight compile, just turn on EOF flag and see what happens, see what works. We did Uniswap, found some issues with call and gas. There is one issue with the Forge standard libraries that we'll address when we get down to Forge. But those are mostly all of the changes to needing the Uniswap v4 core. These all revolve around the call and the gas operation. And these are, we put a recommendation at the top of this, which I'll go over in a bit. But these changes, this remaining issue, we don't need to do that if we do the option D. I took a nap because I couldn't stay up all night. I fell asleep. Open Zeppelin is a bit more interesting. There are a lot of instances of call and gas being used. And there's also some instances of using ext code size to check for the existence of contracts. The 2771 forwarder would need to have some adjustments that are, because it uses gas and it has a good reason to use gas, which figures into our choice for option D. And that the solution there in what's called option A would not be, we couldn't do it as coded. Create 2, in general, we're doing different things with create. These are all specific create 2 things, and basically it's a library that helps you do the quote unquote the right thing with create 2. The fix here would be to write a EOF create or a CX create library that does the right things, that does the analogous things. Clones is a very interesting library that depends on some very specific create 2 functionality. Not much that can be done there. And 165 checker has a hard-coded gas value. And that hard-coded gas value has been there for like almost a decade. And that's the number that's being recommended there. So apart from these specific libraries, just need to update the calls on Open Zeppelin, and those can be used normally. Forge is unique. Forge is the build tool of Foundry. They do some very deep and novel custom VM integrations, which are very clever. And as a developer, I kind of enjoy what they do there. Most of the changes are, again, around static call. They only use static call. There is one issue with how to load contracts in from the file system. And I detail here, but it's basically an on-brand solution for how they could use the new TX create option when they're loading EOF code, doing changes to the VM that are consistent with how they do other changes to the VM when they run in their environment. And finally, Solady, they have their own EOF plan. Solady really focuses on custom assembly, but they have their own plan, so we didn't dive too deeply in there. We just refer people to theirs. Categorical summary of all the problems mostly resolve around EIP 7069, which is the EIP that implements banning gas introspection. If we get rid of this, most of the issues above here are no longer issues. Hard-coding gas values is also part of EIP 7069 because we ban the gas opcode. You can return the gas opcode and add your hard-coded values into your call. I consider this a separate category from hard-coded gas values where you put a real number in your contract. But if you limit the gas available based on some other feature like a user operation or some sort of assigned call data and pass that value in that's similarly impacted, I think this is the safer way to deal with the auditing recommendation not to hard code gas values. You still limit the gas, but you make it a function of something that comes from outside the transaction. So if gas prices change, you can update it. And if we remove 7069 from EOF, this is fixed. Introspecting account types. This is a different thing that we're recommending as part of option D. Is we return the ext code size and ext code hash and ext code copy opcodes, restore those into EOF, but keep the same behavior when reading EOF contracts. So when we restore that behavior, we're able to figure out if an account has a contract or not using the same techniques as before. Direct use of create and create 2. Those are not something that will be adjusted by option D. But these are generally either things that you're doing as a library to help the end user do the right thing. It could be replaced with a new library targeting TX create or EOF create, or you really have deep and interesting things to do with create, and we think the same abilities exist with EOF and CX create. You would just need to write slightly different code to deal with it, and you would generally be very enfranchised, entrenched developer who would know how you would develop these sort of solutions. So while it would be code change, I think the developers that would need to change the code would be very aware of what would need to be done. So as I mentioned earlier, EOF, Ipsilon is recommending that we go with Get's preferred solution, which is the option D in the document we provided in March for EOF. This option as a summary would restore ext code copy, ext code hash, and ext code size, and allow code. We're changing nothing in legacy, but this is inside of an EOF container where it would then be allowed to use those opcodes. So code that expects that in assembly would compile just the same. The behavior when looking at EOF code to preserve the key features of code introspection that we're getting from that would remain the same. If you try and introspect an EOF contract, you would get a contract that looks like the bytes EF00, and you would see nothing else in there. So you could figure out that there's a contract there. You could figure out it's EOF contract, but you couldn't copy random bits of code out of it. The next thing that was important about EOF option D is we removed the entire band gas introspection theme from EOF. This will return call, static call, and delegate call to be valid operations within an EOF container. Call code is a deprecated opcode, so we would not bring that in. It's the same treatment we're giving self-destruct. And also the gas opcode would be available within an EOF container. So if you open this up, I should share this. Let me share this link inside the chat. Let me find the chat. So if you open up the summary, this gives the summary of the final state of all the opcodes that are added and all the opcodes that an EOF container cannot use. And it's a relatively much smaller list. Create because it's necessary for the new create paths, jump for relative jumps, call code self-destruct are deprecated, and code size and code copy also similarly for the code introspection. The changes to the EIPs are not terribly large. The only EIP that has a functional change is 3540. We update the list of banned opcodes and provide this behavior to all. The remainder of the EIPs either change text in rationale or motivation, or if it's a meta EIP, the list of which EIPs are in there. The changes to testing code. The testing code is very well set up to handle a change like this. EOF wrap brings all of the pre-Steel team tests into the East tests, and we would just need to update a few parameters to say which opcodes are valid for EOF and which opcodes are not. So we would get all of the existing legacy tests also applied to EOF. We would not need to then write tests for ext code type and ext code address because those EIPs would be removed. We could repurpose the ext call tests to use plain old call tests and update those. And we would then be able to do gas testing directly. Changes to client codes is also pretty simple. You need to update your dispatch tables, update any other places where you're preventing EOF opcodes from being used outside or other outside non-EOF opcodes from being used inside EOF, and remove ext call from your instruction dispatch. Clients should consider removing ext call, but that's not required. And the changes to the testnet plan, basically things move left 2 weeks. We keep EOF DevNet Plan 1 in place because it's basically done. We're just waiting for teams to finish implementation. And the DevNet 2 plan would remove the new EIPs that we're implementing, and would simply be the EIP where we're changing the opcode tables. We would expect we could ship this 2 weeks after EOF DevNet 1 instead of a month. And because of this, we anticipate that we could be ready for all protocol changes for EOF before the first Fusaka DevNet 0 change, testnet. So this nets to at least removing 2 weeks out of the continued work for EOF and makes it likely so that we will be done before June 1st with major protocol changes. Still left up are the possibility of EIP 7834, the metadata section, and the payout code. Those remain in CFI, and those will be determined via the existing EIP, the existing ACD process, if they go into scheduled or if they go into the client. So that is Ipsilon's recommendation going forward after having listened to all the feedback and considered all the implications not just the developer experience, but to broader things such as cross-chain calls and things like account abstraction wallets. And there's a lot of use cases where being able to specify an external gas value is essential. And looking into that, there really is no other good option other than to let them control the gas. I haven't looked at the chat.
Thanks, Daniel. There's a lot in the chat, but I think the one relevant question is Lucas just posted, what are the downsides of going with option D relative to the other ones?
So why do options A, B, or C as opposed to D?
No, full EOF versus option
Full
D.
EOF.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
option A is full EOF.
Yeah, so it's just that we lose the ban on gas introspection, or is there?
Right. The ban on gas introspection goes away, and we would lose the ban on reading code that is not EOF. Those, however, escape hatches exist. Go ahead.
I think the point is, what do we lose by bringing those back, rather than, you know?
So why did we ban
advantageous?
gas introspection in the first place? Is maybe the good part of this question.
So the reason to ban gas introspection in the first place, the motivation there was to make gas schedule changes easier. When we change the gas schedule, we always have problems with people who have hard-coded values, either directly in their contracts or in their developer tools. And suddenly things start breaking. If it's a developer tool change, those can be updated. But if it's in the contract code, any gas schedule change has the potential of breaking contracts. This is a problem with some contracts because we updated the S-load and S-doors way back before 2020. And it wasn't until we brought in EIP 2929 and 2930 that there was a way to unfreeze those contracts, because we changed the value of a S-load from 100 to, I think, 2,500, which was a very expensive change and broke some contracts because they hard-coded values and expected that gas schedule not to change. So the main motivation of banning gas introspection was to make it so that if there's ever a gas schedule change, the only place that you would have to update any of these hard-coded values would be outside the VM in places like developer tools and pass in the values from the transaction. That was the vision. That was the main motivation for trying to ban gas introspection. As we've looked at more and more use cases, and especially in the past week, a lot more have come up. They're very clear that there are a few legitimate cases where you absolutely must be able to specify a gas value, and we've not been able to come up with a good solution that is not far removed from simply allowing them to continue to specify the amount of gas that they're passing in. So it was a deep introspection. We wanted to try and force people to do good auditor practices, but I think at the end of the day, that's not going to be possible. So that's why we support now removing the ban of gas introspection and leaving it as an audit, and maybe even a compiler warning to say, this is a really bad idea, are you sure? And if the use cases where it's a bad idea and they're sure, they tend to have the compelling security reasons, and they're aware of the risks and they're aware of the breakages that may happen if a gas schedule changes. So the people that are still doing it they're either really aware of it, or nothing that can be done will make them pay better attention. So in the end, forcing this good auditor recommendation is not going to work out as much as we would like it to.
Okay, and there's one more question from Felix I think we should address before moving on, as would there be merit to option D prime with gas introspection enabled and code introspection disabled?
So we just pull out a EIP 7069, but we keep the exe code, copy code, hash code size, opcodes banned. So what we're going to need to do to adjust that is there's a couple of use cases where they do need to know what kind of account is it. Is it a smart contract account? Is it an EOA? Is it a delegate? So to fix that, we proposed two other what I call symbolic introspection opcodes, ext code type and ext code address, that will allow you to do those common introspections and do it as part of the VM rather than having to read the first bytes of the contract and figure it out yourself. The reason for banning that is while we're working on improving developer experience, The thought is we can remove that as well to keep the developer experience the same, because really we're just doing things for them in those dynamic introspections, in those new symbolic introspection opcodes. And it's not that much different from allowing them for EOF opcodes to see the first 2 bytes. So from this decision to restore those 3 opcodes is done with the developer experience in mind. And as Vectorize mentioned, you can use escape hatchet.
Okay. I think it would be good to hear. Hadrian from Open Zeppelin had his hand up a few minutes ago. Given that this was in part brought up because of the impact on dependencies, I don't know, Hadrian, if you want to share a bit on your perspective there, and yeah, then I think we should hear from client teams.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to say few things, and maybe it's not really relevant anymore after the conversation moved to other things, but regarding toolings like Open Zeppelin being compatible with EOF. So first of all, that's something we really want to pursue, and we want to work on that, obviously. One of the reasons we haven't done much work on that is obviously we felt like the tooling was not really ready for us to work on that. We need to have a hard hat or a foundry thing that supports EOF. We need to have a compiler and so on. And that's not something we've had a lot of bandwidth to focus on. But just very quickly regarding everything that was discussed in terms of changes that have to be done to the code, you have to understand that it's very different whether you are addressing something like Uniswap. It was mentioned in the chat that Uniswap is maybe not a good example, but at least I think it's a good example in the sense that they control their code base and they control how it's compiled. In the case of Open Zeppelin or Solidi for that matter, because I think it's the same problem, we want to address the needs of as many developers as possible. And changing our code base so that everything that is in line assembly becomes EOF compliant means that we would serve the needs of EOF users, but all of a sudden anybody that as a developer wants to build legacy EVM contract would not be able to use our code. That would be a big backwards compatible change for us and our users, and that's not something we want to do. So in the end, what it would possibly end up happening is that we possibly need to have 2 versions of our code base, depending on how users want to compile their contracts with different capabilities. That's really something we are not looking into. But unless there is good backwards compatibility with EVM, those small changes are just the tip of the iceberg. In the end, it will be a massive issue for getting the right dependency depending on your compilation path as a user.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, Fede, what was your point about? Just want to make sure we only have limited time. So
Hi. So we're a new team on this is just an opinion from new people. I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody that worked on this for the last years. From my point of view, Ethereum is losing momentum against competitors. That has been happening for the last year and a half. I think that correct prioritization is going to become even more important than before. That's why I think we need to start thinking backwards from the customer to the product, from the product to engineering, and from engineering to research, and not the other way around. Sometimes having research that is not connected with the development of a product is great, especially when you want to do a big change. But in general, when you want to do small changes, it's always good to think in terms of is this going to impact the customer for the better or for worse? So us personally, we're not against EOF for technical reasons, but more for business reasons. Or I don't know if the word business is the best one here, but it's we don't believe it's aligned with what users want. This will take time. Testing this will take time. I think in the last call, people already mentioned the migration from Python 2 and Python 3. That was a very simple thing to do technically for users, but it was a huge mess. Python didn't have a huge competitor. At that time, Ruby was the competitor in some way, or JavaScript, but they were working on another niche. We have a competitor. We don't see how doing these changes will improve the experience of our users. We think there's other things that should be prioritized. So TLDR, we don't think in any way EOF is useful for Ethereum. On mainly the reason is there's other things that are more important. And I think we need to start thinking in terms of what's needed on what we need to prioritize to win, rather than is this a good solution that would improve things by a small delta. So that's our position.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think this is good context. So to hear from the different client teams. So I have posted the order in the chat. I think it would be good to hear from REST first, which were the ones to raise this issue and now seeing most strongly against. Then Nethermind had good articulation of why they supported it, and then Geth seemed pretty split. And then we can do base with Aragon. And I do think, like, yeah, as part of that, you know, it would be good to kind of highlight like why you still think EOF is worth investing the resources on, and also yeah, why you think option D is like a good compromise. Like there was a comment in the chat by Alex a bit earlier that you know, is it clear that option D, asking if it's clear that option D warrants having an entire new VM maintained forever, given that we aren't going all the way. So I think, yeah, if you want to kind of highlight your position and maybe go into those, that'd be helpful. Yeah, to start, anyone from REST on Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, so our order of preference is mainly one, we could just add the swap Duke 17 to 32 opcodes with no EOF. We think this mainly because it fixes, for example, stacked deep, and it seems like a very very low complexity thing to do and low risk thing to do. And I think it would still allow us to ship the next fork very quickly. The second, you know, in order of preference, the second option would be option D. This, I think, is much better than any of the other EOF options, mainly because it allows immediate compatibility from most of the Solidity ecosystem. So it means that we can actually have like significant adoption and see most of the benefits of EOF almost immediately. So this is like we should be able to compile things essentially. I would also like to note that, like, if there's anything we're concerned about with, you know, introspection being an anti-pattern, I think these warnings could even sit at like a higher level of the stack. For example, it could be a lint that or done on static analysis. This doesn't necessarily have to be a compiler warning or something that you could enable, for example, optionally. I think tooling and libraries is kind of the best way to prevent these kinds of anti-patterns. So yeah, I think you know, having introspection would be a fine trade-off if we were to do EOF. But yeah, that's essentially why we have our position.
Thanks. Yeah, Nethermind, do you want to articulate a bit your point of view?
Yeah, so EOF doesn't break anything. You can interop with legacy, you can still deploy legacy, you can use legacy to do escape hatches if you want to do gas limiting routing. We support EOF. We wouldn't support the alternatives in Fusaka. And we were split on option D. Eamon, could you give some points on against option D?
Okay, can you hear me, guys? Hello.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so for option D, adding gas introspection and adding code introspection introduces a lot of unpredictability to code. So we have this project where we try to AOT or JIT legacy bytecode, and the fact that there is the sole existence of gas opcode makes gas analysis or gas amortization extremely not straightforward during the pre-compilation analysis. And for code introspection, it's basically, first, it is an anti-pattern. Second, it makes even formal verification tools that would work on the bytecode level almost unreasonable, because it allows code to essentially, in a way, to modify itself and run itself. And that's not pretty good to verify stuff. And also, the fact that legacy bytecode does not separate between code and data, that makes it, again, if we were to reach the future where we will go to RISC-V or we will start to AOT or JIT this smart contract, it would make it extremely hard to compile bytecode to RISC-V or to whatever assembly we're targeting. And we will end up again with interpreters alongside other VMs or other interpreters working in parallel, which is undesirable. Full EOF would be like the bridge to that, or if we just stick with EOF, it would be the ideal version to go with. And so yeah, that's why I am against gas introspection, code introspection being removed.
Thanks. Yeah.
And
please.
the support on bringing back the opcodes is more of a pragmatic. If it's easier to reach consensus rather than technical.
And also, there's this thing. We are introducing a bunch of opcodes. We are removing other bunch of opcodes. So there would be an expected period where tools such as compilers, other tools, blenders, etc., they would take a period of time to catch up to these changes, right? So expecting that every contract would compile since day zero is a bit unreasonable to begin with. So
it'd be like saying we shouldn't have shipped 7702 because wallets aren't ready 6 months ahead.
Right. Okay. Just to be mindful of time, yeah, can we hear from Geth, please? I think Geth is probably the most split team.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So, I mean, we had an internal discussion about this even before. And I guess it's kind of the question is mostly like, I mean, since I'm the spokesperson for Geth right now, I would say that let's just go with option D, like I said in the previous discussion where we already decided to go with EOF. I feel like pedaling back now is not a good option. And just in general, I do feel like the EVM as an execution environment has been neglected a little bit, and EOF basically catches us up. It does make significant improvements to the EVM's design, and I feel for me this is kind of the main motivation. So it's not so much that there is any one specific change in EOF that makes it really exciting. It's more like it's just an overall update to the EVM, and these things are inherently hard to do, but I feel like it is kind of necessary to like at least get ahead on this process and see where it's going. Also, for example, just simply introducing the versioning of the containers is a good change, and just having the containers in the first place is a good change, and all of these things can really help us in the future. It's hard to say whether they will help us on launch day. Likely not. There won't be any contracts on launch day using EOF, and this is just something inherent in these types of upgrades. But I do feel like over time, we're probably not going to regret adding it. So that's why I am for it. With regard to this option D versus other options, I have been a proponent of option D from the start because I always felt that, for example, gas introspection is just so much of a critical part of how contracts work that I basically could never see like how we can cleanly remove this. And if we had removed it, then it would just mean more contracts would basically stay to the legacy forever, because as long as the legacy contract option is available, which has more features, is not really going to help us. So I feel like the option D is kind of better. Like it opens up EOF for more people to actually use. I do feel like with option D, I'm sure that over time, as for example, also tooling default shift, we would just see a lot, like you would have to make a conscious choice to use legacy EVM. And I think it's just a choice that not a lot of people would actually make. So I feel like option E is the best, and yeah, not sure if we should allow other people from Get to speak, or we should just leave it at that.
I do think,
guess.
like, I don't know if like client you want to share a perspective, but yeah, you've been pretty engaged and are also the author of the new proposal. So I think it would be good to hear your perspective.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think my perspective has been pretty steady for the past couple years at least. But in general, I think there is a lot of pushback against EOF, and the spec is continuing to change. And no one really understands the entire implications of EOF outside of a very small number of people. And you can see this by even Georgios and Julio changing their opinions very late in the process after we've already accepted it. So I think my personal view continues to be that improving the existing EOF is the right path to be going down. And we should understand what our long-term vision is for the EVM and what our long-term vision is for the execution environments. It just doesn't feel like the right time to deploy a major change to the EVM right now. So yeah, I think our stickiest attribute of Ethereum is the developer experience, and EOF is possibly causing us to lose that.
Thanks. Okay, and then let's do Besu and then Aragon after.
Yeah, so I actually like option A. I personally am open to option D. All of our team is open to option D as it stands right now. I think if we value getting rid of introspection, if we think that that is a design goal that we need to have moving forward, we should adopt it as soon as possible. And option D, while a compromise, is insufficient to do that, right? We don't actually get all of the things that we can turn off by fully abandoning introspection. This may be an oversimplification, but I do think this is the root of the problem that we have here. If we as a developer community are not unanimous on the threat that introspection poses to the VM, we should really get that settled out. And so my recommendation is actually option A, but open to option D. So happy to elaborate that more if necessary, but I think reducing it down that simply does crystallize the discussion.
Thanks. And yeah, let's hear from Aragon. Yes.
So our position hasn't changed. We still support EOF, and I think it should be either option A or E. Well, obviously option A is cleaner, but sorry, no, not option E, option D. So A or D. Option A is of course cleaner, but I think even option E brings, option D brings enough benefits, and it's worth doing. Yeah.
Okay, so every client team, just to be explicit, has at least some support for option D. So I think of the EOF versions, this is the only one we should consider. I don't think there's enough support for option A anymore. I do think then there's two things that are worth asking. One is, if we do option D, it means we potentially never do another version of EOF. And so we should see it as not like a stepping stone, but we should be okay with it being, the forever EOF. And then if we do want to ban code introspection, then we'll have an EOF v2. So this means if we do option D, we have to be okay with either we never ban code introspection, or we maintain 3 version of EOF. And then I think the other point that came up a lot, is that this takes away from other priorities. Like we have other things to do. We said we wanted to scale the gas limit, and so to the extent we want to work on those things, working on EOF will take resources away from that. So I think those are the two things worth considering. Like, if any client teams feel like this changes their view, please speak up. Otherwise, I think we can hear from a couple more people. Outside client teams. Let's maybe do Carl first.
Yeah, very briefly. I feel like the reason no one is against option D is because we've decided to make it toothless. Like, we have so little conviction in what we're trying to ship here that it's like, oh, we find the version where no one can be upset at it anymore, and then go ahead and ship that. And I feel like that's really the wrong way to be going about this. Like, either we should decide that we like a feature and that we've done enough research and whatever, that this is what we need for the benefit of the future of the EVM, or not. So I really don't like this option D, and I feel like us settling on option D as an option here is really not a great one.
Let's maybe do Powell and then Duncan, and then we'll do Fede, but want to give the chance to people who haven't spoken yet first.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify the option D because I noticed some mistakes. Maybe there are typos in the saying, but option D removes code introspection of EOF code. So you will not be able to read EOF code. So we will only be able to read legacy code. I think that's a significant difference. So that's it.
Yeah, option D seems toothless if you're ignoring the experience at the application layer, right? It's a compromise, yes, but it's a compromise because the user experience, the application layer experience of full EOF breaks so many things that it completely hinders adoption. And so, yes, it's a compromise, but it's one of those, like, would you rather have something, or would you rather have nothing because nobody wants to use it because it breaks too many different flows?
Okay, but I mean, maybe it's just the cross section of the community I see, but I don't see anyone at the application who's been asking for this. I feel like I agree with what you're saying, but if no one's asking for this, why are we choosing? Like, again, it's an option designed not to upset people.
Yeah. I'd say Solidity pretty strongly supports it, but yes, that is one layer below in the stack. And then Viper does not support it. Do you want to do Fede and then Felix?
Yeah, it's the second time I'm speaking in this type of meetings. I have been only listening for the last few months, so I don't want to be a pain in the ass, but I will say it very clearly. A, this was not, well, I don't see anybody asking this. B, I think there's a potential case where new issues will arise in the future. On the compromise doesn't add much to the table. To me, this shows that the full process of development is pretty non-standard in any project. It's true that Ethereum is strange and different than the rest, but I believe that even if EOF was good, this is not the normal way of creating and prioritizing things. Like, there should be a person saying we want this. Yes, Solidity wants this, but Viper, that from my point of view, it's an objectively better compiler, doesn't have this type of issues. So this could even be solved on the Solidity compiler. So the TLDR is where I get it. I'm going to close it in 1 second. We're against it. I understand that Red is also against it, but they accept the compromise on also Viper. So that's all.
Yeah, and look, I agree with the process having issues. I do think that like this is kind of a weird spot to completely change the entire process. We literally agreed that we're going to refactor all core devs for Amsterdam and going forward. I think the motivation for EOF is also like pretty long standing. Like people have been wanting to do these types of changes to the EVM for several years, at the very least EVM developers. And so you can argue that like, yes, there was not enough community feedback or input. And I think this is something we do have to move towards, but I don't think we can like ship an entire new process overnight in the middle of like finalizing the scope. So there is like a difference there. Yeah, let's do Felix.
Yeah, thank you. So just my comment is also going to be on this point of like nobody has asked for it. I think it's an unrealistic expectation that the application also of Ethereum would ask for a specific improvement of the EVM. So the EVM as an execution environment was designed a long time ago, and it's kind of a bad design. But that hasn't stopped anyone from deploying applications on it, because to be honest, most applications are there for the value that is within the system, and they are not really there for, like how awesome the EVM is. So the motivation for EOF is just to improve the EVM in ways that have been researched for a long time to meaningfully benefit it. So there are a lot of changes in like EOF itself is a collection of changes, and it's a lot of things rolled into this one upgrade, which is supposed to improve the overall environment. And then I guess we could have the same debate, later in a couple of years when we're going to say, nobody asked for EOF version 2. But to be honest, I feel like it's a bit independent because we're not really expecting the authors of contracts to redesign the system by themselves. That said, the overall process of changing Ethereum is an open one, and it is possible, unlike in, let's say, a normal process. It is actually possible in this case for users to raise specific requests, push them through the pipeline, and ultimately get the protocol changed for their own needs. And I feel like this is something that is happening in this case as well. Like people have been pushing these proposals through the pipeline for a long time, and they have built up solid arguments for why we should do it. For example, Solidity has put forth a very, very thought out argument for why they believe that just incremental improvements to the stack handling are not sufficient. And also they have explained at length why it doesn't affect Vipers, because they basically don't use the stack in this way. So I don't think it's really possible for us to just say nobody has asked for this, because people have asked for it, and also like everything that could be considered has been considered before for this with regard to this change.
Thanks. Charles, do you want to share your perspective?
Hello?
Yeah,
Yes,
we can
go
hear
ahead.
you.
Great. I think that if you're going to break backwards compatibility, you shouldn't say that it's like an improvement to the EVM. It's just like a new VM, and it should be sold to users that way, instead of telling them that it's like an improvement to the EVM, but it like breaks all applications. And I've already stated my position on this in previously multiple times and in today's agenda. But just to reiterate, for at least Viper, which is another compiler team, we don't need it. I'm open to improving the EVM, but I think that EOF just couples and packages together too many changes that aren't individually justified. And I don't know. There's always this like pressure to like ship EOF, ship, because like there's going to be no room to get upgrades into the EVM in the future. And I think that encouraging that from ACDE is harmful to the EIP process. And it's resulting in this weird situation where EOF has become this huge package of features that aren't individually justified on their own. And I think that taking a step back would be a really good thing.
Thanks. And okay, two specific things that came up in the chat that I think we should explicitly address is one, whether EOF breaks any existing Solidity contracts and basically potential Solidity flows. And I believe this is correct in the case of create and create two. And then two, whether option D actually allows you to do introspection on an EOF contract itself. So could we just clarify those 2 points?
So for assembly block, the recall out code like create, create two, and also stuff like call code and self-destruct and jump and jumpy, those would not compile. That's really hard to avoid when we're not allowing certain opcodes in the container. But those are also corner cases, and in the case of a create, that's not a contract you'd want to just blindly bring over to EOF. So there would be changes, but they would be sensible. If you're using the create facilities in the Solidity language, those should compile. It's when you go into assembly blocks. As far as introspecting EOF code, what I had written in option D says that you could ext code copy and ext code size in EOF code, and you would get the bytes EF00 in legacy as well as in EOF, and that was the plan going forward. If there is strong desire to be able to read the EOF code completely, that can be done. Writing EOF code is something that is going to be difficult to maintain the features that we need for the transpilation and for the ability to support things like risk of V. So if that is something that is absolutely essential, we could add that as far as the read. But right now, if you read EF00, the core functionality of ext code size, ext code copy, and ext code hash to prove that a contract is that it addresses the contract or not remade. Now, as far as the utility of this, if we were to go to a place where we could recompile it to another ISA, and you could read all of the EOF contract, that's not an impossible thing to support. Just when you do the recompilation, we would need to add a separate data fork that has the original equivalent EOF code to go with it going forward. So this, being able to read all the EOF code does not break this going forward. But the intent was to have the best solution for that. But if this is a deal breaker, we can have it read the entire EOF contract.
Okay, does this answer people's questions about backwards compatibility and? Yeah, Felix?
Yeah, sorry. I'm not sure if I'm cutting off Charles here because he also has his hand up. Or maybe he still has his hand up from before?
Or yeah, but is your point about what Dano just said, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Okay.
So I just wanted to clarify also that just to drive it home even more, that the incentive for designing EOF in the way it is not really for the benefit of the application authors, because we do want to support things such as this transpilation that Dano just mentioned. This is a client, essentially like an EVM implementer's concern. But the current structure of the EVM does not allow us to do this, because the application layer can at any point basically create contracts. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, EOF is in some places more important to the authors of the VM itself, because it makes it possible for us to ship improvements to the EVM that we otherwise wouldn't be able to ship. It's just that these improvements then wouldn't really apply to the legacy environment. And in the long term, this will just mean that the legacy environment will become more expensive to operate than EOF, because we can run the EOF contracts a bit faster, for example. I don't think that this is really a concern that, like, I mean, yeah, it changes the basically we're trying to make this change that allows us to have a better EVM while at the same time not breaking the application developer experience. So this is really the main motivation for EOF. And yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say.
Thanks. Charles?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if option D is like what people are voting on, I think that I know that this document from Ipsilon has been open for a few months, but it is like basically a different spec with different scope, and I think it I'm not sure that all the interactions can be understood over the weekend. I certainly can't. And so I think it may need some I don't know, more like, I don't want to like be like stalling, but or like promoting that, but I think it is more than can be evaluated in a single weekend, and I think that yeah, it needs a little bit more time at least to look at.
Thanks. Let's do Maris and then Ben. Maris hasn't spoken yet.
Sure. I just wanted to say that I don't think we will make a decision today. It seems like no one is being convinced by the arguments that the kind of other side is putting forward, and we will keep in this stalemate forever. So now the question is, what do we do now? And I think there's two options. We either say we're not going to change anything because we agreed at some point that EOF is going to go in, and that was our decision back then when we had consensus, and we keep it this way, or we say we don't agree and we're not coming to an agreement about EOF anymore, and so it has to go out. And I'm still torn, and I think a lot of people on this call are torn between the two options, and they don't really know what the right decision would be. In the past, in these cases, we kind of always defaulted to not doing something, not changing something, because that's the safer option. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. And I guess, yeah, to add to that, like, I agree pretty strongly that the cost of shipping the wrong team, the wrong thing, sorry, is much higher than the cost of delaying. I will say that, like, this has been the story with EOF many, many times and earlier variants of it. So I think it is possible that, you know, if we don't ship this, then we lose people's interest in wanting to pursue these changes. That's maybe fine, but we should be aware. I think this is like the cost in a way that we pay. If we wait, we kind of burn out people who work on this stuff, and they don't see it go live on the network. So, but and I do think, like, yeah, if we do not ship, or if we do not move forward with EOF today, then we should agree to just remove it from Fusaka. It doesn't say anything about what we do to the EVM and other forks, but, you know, it obviously sends a signal to folks work on it. Let's do Ben, and then try to get through the list of people and try to wrap up.
Okay, just following up on the introspection for some clarity. So you can introspect legacy contracts on option D. You can introspect legacy contracts from EOF. You can introspect EOF contracts from both, but the EOF will return just 2 bytes. So the 99% use case of checking, is this a contract? You can do that with that introspection. You're not going to use an EOF contract as data on chain from a legacy contract, because you would do it in reverse. You'd deploy a legacy data contract, or you'd be calling the EOF contract from an EOF contract, in which case there are data container introspections on EOF from EOF. So there is an introspection where you can introspect the data sections as part of EOF. But I don't see why you would want to be introspecting the full container system from using code introspection, because now you've got to parse it and do all this, and that's very expensive to do on chain. I'm not sure what you'd achieve with it.
Thanks. Let's do, Ahmad.
Yeah, so quickly I want to reiterate that adding EOF is a feature. It's like adding an opcode, right? Nothing that exists break, and if you don't want to use it, you don't have to. And this means that we are putting EOF in an argument like, if I add an opcode, then all the existing contracts, or once they compile, they should use this opcode. And if no existing contracts use this opcode as soon as this opcodes land on mainnet, that means that this opcode is useless and we shouldn't be using it. This argument is like, I don't understand it. Like there is time. It will take time for the migration to happen. This is normal. We chose EOF to be like this for reasons. I am not an expert on why we did EOF with no gas introspection. I am not an expert on why we chose to do EOF without code introspection, but these were done in years of research and hard work by a lot of people. And coming in now and saying, oh, but existing contracts will not be able to use this new feature, and that's the reason why we should remove all of these decisions that we have already researched and made for actual important reasons for the EVM and for Ethereum, is not the right thing to do for me. But yeah, that's all I want to say.
Thanks. Ansgar?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, clearly the process here has been very broken. I think we are luckily at least in a position where we're currently in a moment in time where a lot of things are changing in Ethereum anyway. I am very high hopes that starting it with the Glamsterdam process, we will have a much more functioning process. I think we'll also have to spend a lot of time thinking about how we can, for example, have user interest, developer interest much more in the loop for future EVM changes. So all of this, I think, will improve significantly for future forks. That said, we have to make a decision for Fusaka. I think we really need to make a decision today. We have spent way too much time on this in the past. I actually think in terms of process, the process has been primarily broken and violated by people that are opposing EOF. I think kind of they failed to have enough support to stop it from being included for the initial fork, and then last call the decision was made to decide already today, which was very short time. Now the very short time was not enough to really fully understand the options. So I think primarily the failure was on that side. That said, I just think it is impossible to ship a feature that has so much contentious feelings as EOF still has. Like, it's just you cannot possibly ever ship a feature where people feel so divided on this. So I just think, even though I feel like the team did everything right, and I think the process has been more followed by them than by the opposing side, I just think at this point we have no choice but to just pull the feature. That's my opinion.
Thanks. And one thing I note I just posted in the chat is that, like, yes, core devs write the code for the hard forks, and like there is like some majority that supports this. But core devs don't decide which hard forks actually get activated on Ethereum. To the extent they do, it's because they ship non-contentious features. And even though like there's a high cost of forking, the other like way for people to exit is to just use another chain. So I do think like this is something to take into consideration. Yeah, let's do Andrew and then like client.
So yeah, it's been talked about Ethereum staying competitive and focusing on big things or important things, and I totally agree with that. But I think not shipping EOF will hinder that, because it's a well thought through improvement, and a lot of people have been putting a lot of work on it. And as I think most people would agree, option D is actually it solves most of the potential critique of the EOF. It brings enough benefits. So if we kill EOF now, then I think we will find it more difficult to do the like the non-trivial improvements to EVM going forward.
Thanks. And yeah, I agree this is right. Like we can say we will ship EOF maybe in the future, but we should recognize that like it will demoralize a lot of these people and a lot of the most experienced EVM contributors, and that is a cost to pay. Yeah. Does he like Klein?
Yeah, I just want to quickly raise a few points that I made in the chat. I think in general, we should be focusing on changes that support users and not changes that support the EVM implementers. There's a long list of things that we could be doing and things that would be more noticeable and provide more benefits directly to users. So I think the fact that the biggest proponents of EOF are client teams and Solidity is something that's concerning. I don't see near as much support for it on the app layer. And then, you know, in general, it seems clear we don't know what to agree on here. And to me, that's a decision in and of itself. Like, if we don't have conviction, we should remove EOF from Fusaka, and we should just focus on fixing stack too deep.
Thanks. To Duncan, Julio, Minsom.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion around the process here, and that you know, the process concluded that EOF option A was the path forward. But you know, so I'm an application dev, and it's not clear to me that that research and that process took feedback from the application layer into account. Right, you know, it's not clear to me where the venue for that is. It's not clear to me when an EIP is sufficiently solid that application devs should begin reviewing the impact on their applications. And if you have opinions, you know, beyond screaming on crypto Twitter or posting on Ethereum Magicians, where's the place to make that voice heard? So I think that's a lot of where this this feeling that the feedback is late arriving, you know, the process is being violated. You know, we're making emotionally driven decisions rather than rationally considered ones, because there was a large section of Ethereum stakeholders who weren't included in that process structurally, maybe apathy, maybe, you know, a lack of sense of urgency. But that's really where the mismatch of expectation and the feeling of violated process is coming from.
Yeah, thanks. Julio?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if EOF doesn't make it into Fusaka, it will probably never make it into Ethereum, at least in my head, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And also, so we need to be honest with ourselves about that. And I think that it's kind of too late to just remove it from inclusion, because we already went on with the process, and as Ansgar already said, the process kind of was broken by anti-EOF people, and I think that maybe we can do, but we can learn from this in the next time. But I think we should we should do EOF just for the sake of respecting the process.
I pretty strongly disagree with that. Like, I think we should really try and stick to the process, and it's hard to like, yeah, get credible commitments about what we're going to do next if we don't. But we shouldn't, like, the process exists to serve the outcome, right? Like, and most of the time it works and it does the job, and the process by definition will fail in like exceptional circumstances. Then I think this is what we see here. Personally, like, I don't care much about the EOF. I'm not an EVM developer, a Solidity developer. I've been like in touch with the people who've worked on it for the past many years. I don't feel super comfortable keeping it in Fusaka, given the amount of pushback. Like, I think Moody had a comment saying, you know, he's one of the core Solidity and application developers, and you know, he should be like excited if EOF comes in, and he's not. Like, my sense is that if we do want to overhaul the EVM in such a way the thing we should do is to do this in conjunction with like smart contract developers and the tooling community more broadly. I understand Solidity is quite supportive, but the fact that we have Viper being pretty strongly against is also kind of a strong signal. So it feels like if you wanted the right process for EOF specifically, it would have to be one that just brought these stakeholders on board much earlier and design something that both EVM maintainers and the client teams and kind of tooling providers and application developers all really like. And yeah, I don't feel like that's been the case here. And I know we're already 20 minutes over time, but yeah, at this point, my suggestion would be to remove EOF from Fusaka, to not add anything in its place. I think we should keep PeerDAS as a target. We already have all this gas limit stuff and a couple other small EIPs. I think from a process perspective, saying like we don't open the door to anything new feels right. Like, and I know that there's like the swap and dupe EIP, but like I don't know. I feel like if we do want to improve the EVM, we should actually like make that the focus of a fork and like do it right. And yeah, like there are some CFI EIPs that we can talk about on ACDE next week, but I would not like open the door to new proposals. And yeah, I understand like some of the client teams or like maybe a bunch of them will disagree. And yeah, I think this is a hard call. Like yeah, I just don't see a world where we push EOF forward and don't have it become an extremely contentious topic, and effectively compromise the fork. And this is not even getting into the specific technical issues. Yeah, so I don't know, like I know that basically 4 out of the 5 client teams may disagree with this. And yeah, I don't know that we have something like a veto. So if the 4 client teams want to focus on EOF and work on it, like we should probably go towards that. But my opinion is I don't think we should do it. But yeah, I don't know that I get to say like what engineers actually work on day to day. Yeah, so I don't know, like, yeah, Justin, Tomasz, I don't know, what's your perspective?
We can see a few other hands before me.
Yeah, I don't know, were they about, I guess, like, yeah, let's keep it about the specific, like, moving forward next steps. So I don't know, Powell, was that what your hand was about, or Andrew?
If I may go on, I have heard concerns about core devs actually tipping the balance in favor of EOF. Well, that's because the EVM developers had the job of innovating and doing research in this direction, and now they have come up with their conclusions, and we have different options. Of course, some of those are not ideal and are compromises. So I think that's the way to go. And the way we are seeing contentions and arguments against may not also give us the correct picture of what we all want, because the natural course was that EOF was going into Fusaka. And now, in order to stop that, you have to, even if you are a minority, you have to raise your voice higher than everything else and stir the quiet waters. So I think maybe we are hearing very loud noises from the minority, even when the client teams are agreeing to go with the compromise option D. I'm not a developer of EVM or EOF for that matter, but that's what I think. But my question is also around things going forward in terms of research and innovation. I know that on Thursday we talked about, or it was brought up that risk RISC-V architecture, or any other ISA, or something new going into ZK friendliness might also come in the future. Now my question is what happens to the app developers then? Like they might not be using those features, but that's where we want to go in terms of where we want to steer Ethereum. And it's mostly up to these researchers and developers to push it in that direction, because abstracted a level higher or a couple of levels higher, similar VMs can be found in L2s as well. But from Ethereum's perspective, this is the circle that actually pushes the limits of innovation forward. So that's it's reasonable to expect that there is a tight-knit circle which is doing the bulk of the research and development work. Also, testing, and whenever you have to push something new, it's going to take time. It's going to have devnets and so on. And the contention around the tooling and the languages for the EVM update does make us think twice around the readiness, but it's not the readiness of the EOF itself, but rather the readiness of the abstractions on top of those and the tools on top of those. Now, agreed that a lot of the business value actually resides in those higher levels. And I think towards the beginning of the call, as we saw, that it's not that hard of a task if you consider option D to go forth and do it. And most of these challenges can be near about to completion, completely ironed out and fixed soon enough, reasonably soon enough. And I also agree with Tim that if there is a stir, if there is some kind of arguments going on, whatever that may be, that's an indication that maybe not everything is going to go smoothly in the hard fork, which we eventually have to push. So maybe we can delay this. And I would actually subscribe to a world where something like PeerDAS is not dependent on the fate of EOF. It's not like if we do not decide to include it in Fusaka, it would forever be deleted from history. It's a far better thing to do, to have another fork solely for EOF, which is further down the line from PeerDAS, and do PeerDAS for Fusaka instead, and that too solely. And also not accepting any other new EIPs in its place either, as Tim said.
Thanks. And yeah, on this point, new EIPs is something we should definitely discuss on the next Alcor Devs. We're already 30 minutes over. I think today's decision should just be EOF or not. I think Justin, you just put your hand down, but I think you were one of.
Yeah, I was in line. I actually don't think this is an EOF or not forum. Like, this is, to be fair, a testing call, and granted, everybody showed up, but it was because they heard something on Twitter over the weekend. So no, I don't think that the decision should be made now. We're doing the best that we can with this situation. I appreciate the work that you're doing specifically, Tim, in trying to wrangle these cats. But the idea that we would do an about face after a pretty hard fought decision was reached to go with option A about a month ago, I find a little shocking. And I don't know that a vocal minority should be listened to, but also if EOF is intended to pay off technical debt, I don't know that we take advice from the people that aren't experiencing the technical debt. So, I appreciate what was just said about decoupling EOF from PeerDAS. I think that's totally reasonable. That should totally be on the table. But if we took the miners' perspective into consideration, would we have shipped 1559? Would we have shipped the merge? At some point, we are stewards of the protocol and have to be responsible for the tech debt that we are, accruing and paying it off. So, I'm of a mind that we need to stop thinking like product developers and more like platform stewards. So, I've said my piece. I fully expect this to be a much longer conversation to be held elsewhere, and I'm sorry we're so over time.
Yeah, thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense to separate EOF from PeerDAS, and PeerDAS is probably more important than EOF. But luckily, it's what we have at the moment. We have two DevNets, and we should keep doing that. And I think we should explicitly activate EOF not by Fusaka time, but its own time. And if PeerDAS is ready before EOF, we can ship Fusaka with no EOF. But I think the commitment to be, if we do that, then we should have an EL only fork soon after Fusaka with EOF, and that gives us time to deliberate on option A versus option D. But to my mind, either option A or option D should to go into a fork.
I think, yeah, based on that, maybe what I would propose as a next step, like I do think we should decouple it from Fusaka and remove it from this fork. Like it's clearly extremely contentious, if not within core devs, within the community, whereas PeerDAS isn't, and it feels weird to couple them on that ground. But I would not be comfortable saying we then schedule a fork for the EL only just with EOF. This is basically how we got EOF in Fusaka, because we split it out of Pectra. But what I would propose is we remove it from Fusaka. We then have the Glamsterdam conversations using the new process, where we first start to think about what's important in Glamsterdam. Maybe the thing that comes out of that is we want to improve the EVM and do it ASAP, and we want an EL only fork. If that's the outcome of that like high level conversation, then great, we can consider an EOF only fork. But I definitely do not want to commit to some future timeline. So I would just say that, like, yeah, I think in terms of next step, like removing EOF from Fusaka feels like the least contentious path forward. If people who are supporting EOF want to make a strong case for it for Amsterdam or for an EL only fork, we should do this, but we should do it in the context of like a revised all core devs process that takes other perspectives into account. And I understand that like removing it from Fusaka may be interpreted by a lot of people working on this as like, we're never going to do it. And I think the rest of the community should expect that EOF developers may not be so enthusiastic to keep working on this if it gets removed, and as it has been in the past. So yeah, that's kind of how I would wrap up this. Removing it from Fusaka, we can reopen the conversation for Glamsterdam. Maybe this means an EL only fork, but we should we just shouldn't couple those things. And then similarly on the next all core devs, we can decide what other CFI DIPs we want to bring in. But I don't think we have the time to do this today. So I don't know if anyone has like a really strong objection to this or wants to say final thing, we can hear that, but otherwise it feels like the best path forward, least worst path forward maybe.
Hello?
Oh, yeah, Tomasz.
Yeah, my comment
Oh
is
yeah,
now
Pavel, yeah.
out of context a bit, but really quickly. So my kind of mental model of EOF is that it consists of the core component, and then there were two extensions that were added over time. One was code introspection, and the other one was class introspection. And we spent over an hour discussing these two extensions and what friction it brings to the application layer. But actually the core of EOF, it's pretty transparent to application layer. That may be disliked or liked, but the core of EOF improves the EVM itself. And the fact we didn't spend a single minute discussing the core EOF maybe it's a good indicator that it's actually transparent to the outside world. And yeah, that was the main motivation. I'm sorry this core EOF doesn't maybe affect contracts outside, but that's the fact about it.
Thanks. Okay, well, I think we can wrap here. I posted TLDR in the chat. I'll open up a PR for the Meta EIP. And yeah, like I think the process stuff is something you should handle in Fusaka because there's so much uncertainty around the process. Like this feels like a better forum to make the call on EOF. And I think part of the reason for this as well is every client team, both on the EL and CL, have like stated pretty often, pretty explicitly that PeerDAS is the priority. And it just feels like there's like technical and social risk to EOF at this point, that coupling it seems risky. So again, I think there's a world where, you know, we do just ship Fusaka and we, you know, we do EOF right after because everybody likes it, and that's great. But I think for now it's really not the right approach to couple it in the same fork. Yeah, thanks everyone. And yeah. Also, the last thing is we can discuss next steps for Fusaka on the EL side on ACD next week. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.